Hi, I'm Jeff Provine. I'm here to talk about voice. So voice is one of those words that gets thrown around to mean a lot of different things. Some people take voice as your form or format of writing. Maybe you write very journalistically with choppy sentences, really strong verbs, minimal description, just get the facts. Or maybe it's more of an epic story, something that gives lots of description, monologues, even some introspection back on the past. Or maybe it's a children's story, something very simple and gentle, maybe a little bit of mystery and magic, but not anything that's too threatening. Other people take voice to mean your characteristic speech. How do you form your sentences? What words do you call things? Kind of showing where you grew up. There's another voice in which people talk about your ideology, your attitudes. What do you write about and what do you say about these things? In all these different versions of voice, they come together in talking about style. Voice is the style of your story. Author Ailey Martinez has a really good discussion on a Periscope about voice. I've got a link to this in the info below, and he discusses all about the unique quality of voice. So it's bringing something to the table that nobody else has, which he talks about being your personality. So what is it about you as a storyteller that makes you interesting? Talking about personality is a little wonky, but when we think about it, it is something that is gripping. Take stand-up comedians, for example. They can tell a whole story about something as simple as a car trip to the airport, but people will be hanging on every word. Entire crowds will be moved by this, just because they have such a big personality. Finding and bringing out your personality is a big thing to do. You gotta dig deep and find what it is that you want to say. What is something you want people to hear? Maybe it's even something silly, which silly's not wrong. A lot of the biggest movies in the world right now are about people wearing tights running around with superpowers. Or maybe you want to say something a little bit more serious. Maybe you want to show the passion of finding true love. Or what about the action and adventure of the underclass rising up to overthrow somebody who's oppressing them? These are all great and wonderful things, and you should tell them using your voice. Once you figure out what you want to say, the trick is to get people to listen. A good way to do this is with a premise that really grabs people's attention. So a premise is the one-sentence kind of summary of a story. For example, The Lord of the Rings stretches over thousands and thousands of words and 3 novels, but you can summarize it as a hobbit, this person who's thought to be the least of the least, is actually the most important person in the world through his inner strength. And that's a pretty gripping idea. Now you've got your audience engaged even before they started reading the story. One great way to show your story clearly in its premise is to give the genre. So the genre is kind of the category of where this story fits with similar stories in literature, art, movies, whatever you like. So inherently, genres are subjective. They're abstract lines just drawn in the sands of storytelling. But they can be really helpful in defining what kind of story this is going to be. You can establish a connection with the audience as they already know what to expect. If you're writing a Western, it's going to be set in the West. If you're writing a romance story, somebody's going to fall in love. If you're writing a tragedy, people can really get geared up for this emotional outpouring as the catharsis comes. The old saying goes, there are no new stories, just new twists. And the more I think about this, the more I agree with it. Mary Shelley broke new ground when she wrote Frankenstein as the first science fiction novel. But it's also continuing the tradition of science romance storytelling, exploring too far, conjuring creations that get out of your control. These are things people have talked about for centuries. People might say, well, what about Jurassic Park? Nobody ever wrote a story about genetically cloning dinosaurs. But what about H.G. Wells' Island of Dr. Moreau? One is a story where a man with a vision uses super science to create monsters that he thinks are great but lead to disaster. And the other is a story where a man with a vision uses super science to create monsters he thinks are great but inevitably lead to disaster. So when you're thinking about your story, see where it fits with stories similar to it. This can be a great hint on kind of the details of where to put in order of your plot, when to show character entry, all those fun things. It can also detail, when do you solve the mystery? When does the couple have the big fight before they get back together for good? All these little details can be seen in the genre. But you don't want your story just to be a photocopy of something you've seen before. This is where the twist becomes very important. What does your story have that's never been done before? So for example, you could take the samurai classic, Seven Samurai. This is about warriors who are hired to defend a village of poor farmers. Take that story and then turn it into a Western, and you get Magnificent Seven, which is about these 7 kind of outlaw folks coming together to defend a village of poor farmers. Or Pixar's A Bug's Life. This is where we get kind of a circus crew going to defend a village of ants who are, of course, farmers. They're all essentially the same story, but they're all very different and all very good because they've got those key twists. And using your voice, you're going to write a story with a twist that's never been seen before. But it is going to be upon a foundation of everything you've ever heard, ever seen, ever been told, kind of wrapped together in your subconscious and then spat out through your imagination. As you're doing this, since it is just basic psychology, you want to make sure you know what's going in. So this is a great chance to look once more at kind of the conflict of essential stories. So we talked a little bit about conflict in the episode on plot, but to go back on it, we summarize stories as mechanically a protagonist with a goal. So seeing what that goal is, we can kind of go into more detail on what are the key parts of each story. The ancient Greeks talked about there being 2 types of stories. We have the comedy and we have the tragedy, and you do slightly different things in both of them. If you mixed it up a little bit, the audience might get a little confused and the story might fall apart. But if we go into more detail, we can see different types of plots. So William Foster Harris talked about 3 kinds of story: the happy ending, the unhappy ending, and the literary story, which is about unraveling a mystery, typically with an unhappy ending. Other people go even further. They talk about there being the 7 essential plots, or Ronald Tobias's 20 plots, or George Polte's has the 36 plots. I've got lists to all of these different plots in the info below. Take a look at them and see what you can get inspiration-wise. What does this classic tale of a hero versus a dragon have to do with your story of overcoming a robotic car? Drawing from those, not only can you see kind of some inspiration in the past, but you can also see maybe there's a new twist. Maybe there's something that's not yet been done before, and this is where you can make the story more interesting. We've talked a lot about the mechanics of story crafting, but let's take a minute to step back and look at the art. So when you're writing your story, you're not only making something that's entertaining and engaging, you also have the opportunity to make people think, to feel, to analyze a theme. So theme is the underlying subject matter of your story that raises it to a higher ideal. In your stories, you can explore things like good versus evil, something as simple as that, or maybe something as complex as the effects of capitalism on an individual. It can be anything you want, anything that is important to you that you can put out there with your voice to say, hey, this is what we need to look at. This is something that is important to us all. Stephen King writes a lot on the themes of family compared with the moral obligation to complete your quests in life. It comes up again and again in his Dark Tower series, as Roland must choose between his quest and the lives of his friends. Or in Salem's Lot, with Ben caring for Mark as they flee from vampires. And King inverts this to horror in The Shining, when Jack Torrance goes homicidally insane instead of providing for his family. Your stories will include a theme or 2 or maybe 12, even if you don't intend it. So the key is, do intend it. Take a look back at what is the story about? What is it on a moral or philosophical level? And then you can see how each detail within the story ties into that. This is a great way to really get your voice to stand out. Show those things that are important to you. But then again, don't be too preachy about it. Make sure that you're telling the story first and letting kind of the morals and philosophy lie on kind of a lower level. Make people feel it rather than have it jammed into their head. Don't be preachy once again, just tell a good story. So far in this episode, we've scratched the surface of voice, which is your own way of storytelling. Your voice is going to come out of all the stories that you've read and enjoyed before, but it is also going to reflect on your values. So, find out what you like and then give it a twist. What's the new thing that's going to make your story stand out from anybody else's? And also, underlying, what are your favorite themes? What are these things that you think about and hold dear to yourself? And how can you tell those to other people in a way that not only entertains them, but gets them engaged? Everybody knows what they're going to expect when they hear, oh, that's a Stephen King story. What are they going to think when they hear your name? Episode 5's anthology I was in is the Winter 2014 edition of the Dragon Poet Review. The Dragon Poet Review is an online literary journal that features a wide variety of poetry, flash fiction, and short memoir, as well as photography, artwork, and reviews of books, arts, and film. The journal is published twice annually in the winter and summer. Small journals like these are a great place to get your work out there and to hold a conversation with other artsy types. I heard about the launch of the Dragon Poet Review kind of through the grapevine. I was lurking around on Facebook groups and message boards, seeing who needs writing. When I saw kind of the literary bent of the journal, I dug through my old manuscripts until I found one that fit perfectly. This is a story called The Pig, which was inspired by Hans Christian Andersen. I was reading a collection of his fairy tales at the time. I thought this could be modernized, so I wrote a story about a piggy bank, and he learns that pride cometh before a fall. Literally in this case. Check out the link in the info below to get your free copy of the Dragon Poet Review. There's a lot more to talk about in mood and style when you're dealing with your voice, so check out episode 5.1 following this episode. But that's all for now. Writers, keep writing.